Welcome to the next edition of Beyond the Bubble. And today we have a very special guest, someone who I had got to know about a decade ago, but then we weren't really in touch. And a lot has happened in that decade, some of which he has written about, some of which he has deeply thought about. And he has a very interesting career path, being an osteopath, but also being a public speaker, a book author, and many other things. So a warm welcome to have with us, Tom.
Thank you, András, for having me.
So glad to have you here because just like I said, we had basically got to know each other about a decade ago.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? Yeah. Okay. And that was around, I think I went to you as a patient of sorts, or did we meet in the context of the public speaking?
I think in the context of public speaking, it was I remember that we met on the Avenue Brockville.
That's right, in Brussels, yeah.
And in Brussels. And from then onwards, we've always been in contact like online, right? And then you moved around and then you had kids, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And, we never managed to somewhere catch up again. And then suddenly, life brings us back together. Isn't that fantastic?
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And we'll go deep. We'll go deep and we explore all of that. But before we get there, so you are by training an osteopath. Is that right? Or your career started even before that? You had a previous life.
Yeah, my previous life. So I'm actually trained as a chef.
As a chef, okay.
Yes. So I did catering school from when I was 12. So we're talking about 1982 until about 19. I trained as a chef in Antwerp because I'm originally from Antwerp, and I'm now a local expat in Brussels. I call myself
local expat. I haven't heard it before. Okay.
Yeah, because one, I come from Antwerp. Two, in the 1990s, I spent 8 years in England, and I came back as a foreigner, keeping English as a first language instead of Dutch as well. But yeah, I was trained as a chef. Then, like in that last year, I had a stage. So you have to do a 1 month placement in a traineeship, and then found out that I didn't like it. Didn't really like the being in the kitchen, which was so isolated. It was with a few people, and if you didn't like one, that was a huge problem. And I was a social person, so I switched towards the restaurant side as a waiter. So my first jobs was as a waiter, and the first job was in England. Why England? Because I wanted to improve my English, because my dream was to go on a cruise ship to work as a waiter, which I eventually did as well.
It's interesting. So your dream was to actually work as a waiter, because most people start as a waiter, but they don't necessarily want to stay in that job.
No, I had also, when I was working in the weekends, I started working when I was 16 in the weekends. And I always worked in the restaurant, on the restaurant side, never in the kitchen. I don't know why that was, but it was something.
That's your social self.
Maybe my social self. Also, there was probably more opportunities to work in the restaurant side at the time. And then when I finally had to get a job, well, kitchen was not me, so I went into the waiting side. And yes, working on the cruise ships, it would have been as a waiter, which I worked on the QE2, so the Queen Elizabeth II, which is at the time was the most renowned cruise ship.
QE2.
Queen Elizabeth II is one of the most renowned cruise ships in the world at the time, and still today it's one of the iconics of cruise ships.
Flying under a British flag, or
it was flying under a British flag.
Cruising.
Cruising, yes. And it was Cunard, and today that ship is in Dubai as a hotel. Okay. It's a stationary hotel in Dubai. So when you go to Dubai, stay there. It's a bit outside of the town, but it's a beautiful place. And also it has the soul still of the time then, of when it was sailing the seven seas. And it's the cheapest place you can get in Dubai.
So it's like the Orient Express of the seas, which is now stationary.
Yeah. And I did 2.5 years on there. And I eventually came back to Belgium in 1998. So 8 years I was away. So working hotels, working on a cruise ship, also backpacking around the world, 9 months, 7 months. Also ventured into the wine industry, so more into wine sales. On the cruise ship as well, I was a sommelier at one stage. Came back, and that's when the moment that you say from, okay, what next? I had tried on the cruise ship and even in hotels, I tried to be an assistant manager or a supervisor and always failed. So 2 months later, I would fall into some kind of a depression. I just could not handle it. Handle leading people. It was not for me. And so I always had to come back into my waiter or sommelier part of a job. And I really thought that was the rest of my life. It was going to be that because I could not do anything else. I was considered good for nothing else, basically. And even in my youth, my dad, sometimes said to me, Tom, I can't be proud of you. It's like I go to my work and on Monday, and my colleagues are saying about this about their daughter, that about their son. What can I tell about you? Nothing. Can't even be proud of you. Bam, bam, bam. Yes.
That's heavy.
That is heavy, but it was, yes, partly frustration. Partly he was right. I was not somebody with a lot of things I excelled in. I was quite a loner. And yeah, I think my dad also at that time with divorce and everything like that was probably going through a few problems of his own that you don't realize when you're a kid. Now you see that with other eyes. And also, there is a very important factor that I've only realized while writing my second book, that I was looking and say, from where does this actually come from? This feeling that, my dad left me a little bit on the side, or that I felt that I brought myself up by myself. And it was because the first 3 years of my life I spent with my grandparents. Because my father was working, was building a house. And those first 3 years, my granddad, they raised me, but also they took me everywhere. My granddad had time. And I think I never had to make a decision in my first 3 years, of even till about 6 or something like that. It was a lot with them. So granddad and I would take me to Antwerp to visit, in the cellar to do some bricolage, and so to do some woodwork or something like that. He was an ebonist. And everything we did, it's like everything was handed to me. And my dad was different.
Until the age of 3, I think that's quite normal.
Yeah, but afterwards as well, to about 6 years old, until I went to primary school, I was a lot with my grandparents.
But there are two things here, if I can just pause you for a second, where you say things were done to you, not in a bad way, but done for you, perhaps. That's a better formulation. So things were done for you, so you couldn't or didn't have to make any proper decision. No. But then there was the other thing you said where you felt a bit put aside.
Yeah, that was my dad.
Right?
Because
your dad
I was expecting the same thing of my dad. Mm. And so when I was looking back at that, I always waited for my dad to come and get me. And I had this conversation with my dad after the publication of my first book. But how did you see me? And that is where my dad said, yeah, when people have, when parents have children, they often forget themselves and it's all about the child. I was not like that. If you wanted to do something with me, that was okay. And if you didn't, that was okay too. And that's where the direction comes in. My dad was waiting for me and I was waiting for my dad. So and my mom was always ill, so I couldn't.
Sort of a miscommunication, but at the same time, I think this attitude is actually a pretty healthy one, but perhaps not so early on, right? Like, because early on it's the bonding, and that sort of giving the kid more autonomy is probably super helpful, maybe in teenage years or later.
Yeah. So, but that is all that time. Today, I consider that kind of upbringing. That is what I needed to be who I am today. So there was a stage of my life, so just before 29, where I saw that as something negative. Now, and then from 29, 30 onwards, through to coaching, when you are taught to change perspective, that story became completely different. And from then onwards, also the story with my dad changed and became better.
And that's fascinating because the facts on the ground have not changed.
No.
That's your past, and things happened the way they did. but the way you framed it in your mind and the narrative you were telling yourself shifted thanks to your own inner discovery and coaching and many other things you must have done, where the very same Lego bricks, you built a different design from it.
Yeah. And so this is like translating that all the time and purifying that process that happened has been for me something very revealing. Because the first thing is you need to actually know the problem. Right? So somewhere there is a conflict. And what is that conflict? You need to name that. And then also name that what you want. I'm an osteopath today, so the first question I ask my patient, what's the problem? But the next question is what do you want? And often people know what they don't want, but rarely do they know what they want, except for no pain. And that's very interesting, because if you're always going to say from, I don't want this, or I don't want that to happen, you're actually creating avoidance behavior. And I'm shifting the perspective, as you say, it's like, but now, what do you want? Because if you don't know what you want, how can you make choices, decisions, and actions that are actually in your favor, or that are actually constructive? When you only know what you don't want, your choice is in avoidance behavior, which is not constructive.
Because you have here a point, a burning fire, some pain that you definitely want to run away from. But there are a million directions you could run away to. Yes. And if you don't know which one, you're definitely not going to get there.
Yeah. And also then, and that is what you're alluding to earlier on, so you first have to have that conflict and from what it is, what you want. I call that introspection. That is when you stand still for a moment, say from what is happening here. And you do some introspection to do retrospection. Right?
So you can actually look back from a stable position.
Yes, and you go back and then you change that perspective. And sometimes changing that perspective is something you need help with. I could not do that on my own because my upbringing let me see things in a certain way, and I had not learned, I was never confronted that you could see things in a different way, and a different way, and a different way. And that's what coaching did to me. And that is what's so great.
But let's go back for a second. So you were still trying to find your path from the cruise ship, from being a chef, so many, all the rest. And at one point, you went to osteopath school.
One step before is that I came back and I was thinking from what am I going to do next? The waiter was the only thing I could see, and it was quite depressive moment because you think from, really? Is that it? There was a lot of somewhere anxiety and a sort of failure feeling. Then is when a friend of mine called me up, a friend from school, from a catering school. They say, from Tom, what are you doing? Well, nothing. I say, we want to expand our business and you might be an ideal candidate. And his business was a deli. It's like a trattoria deli selling charcuterie, cheese. So while I had been away wandering around the world for 8 years, he had built up a very successful business. And he had a very beautiful car, motorbike, house, wife, business, esteem in the community. And he wanted to expand. They had a place that I could open in Mechelen. And he said, wouldn't you be interested? And I saw the bling bling, and I said yes. So a couple of months later, on 9/9/99, I opened my own deli in Mechelen under his guidance and under that kind of franchise name. And 2 months later, I was suicidal depressive. Yeah, it was the worst moment because
2 months later.
2 months later, yeah. 1, it did not work. 2, I never had thought that it would not work. I never even considered that you had to work for it.
Work for
making it work.
Like as a business-wise.
As a business-wise, I have no idea about business at the time. But also, it was so logical that they thought it was going to work that I just accepted what they told me. And it was in a small street. It was a local shop. And people were not ready for that. And also, it was not my place. I was used to traveling around the world, and suddenly I was cooped up in this shop where I lived. It was a prison. You know, in Delhi, you have to run on your own. You are there from early morning to late at night. You cannot go anywhere. You cannot just close the door and say hey, I'm gone.
You were out in the savannas of the world, and suddenly you were a caged animal.
Yeah. I was in my, like Aladdin in a cage, right?
Sounds like it.
And then it's like, that was, so everything about that is now great, because it also taught me, from this is not it. But in that moment, I did not see a way out, because again.
But that's what depression is, to a large degree. You don't see a future.
You don't see a future, and the world becomes smaller and smaller. Also, now, as an osteopath specialized in stress-related conditions, I also know that when you're in a stress situation, that, for example, not only the vascularization of your body changes, but also in your brain. So the brain shifts blood towards the central parts, towards the survival parts of your brain, and takes it away from the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, so memory loss, and also reflection loss.
Since the prefrontal cortex is where the cognitive functions
functions. And it goes towards the central part and the amygdala, which is fear. So your fear increases.
Overrun.
So the fear increases because that part gets more glucose, more oxygen. And the cognitive parts, the time perception changes as well, because stress is about now, not about tomorrow. And so all of that changes. And that is very interesting, again, how I think today's problems of mental health problems are not psychological, but biological.
As well, yeah.
As well. So now understanding how that world became smaller and smaller, how thinking outside of the box became more difficult, until the pharmacist, local pharmacist, a couple of doors away, who I'd been talking to about my problems. I was 29, I had never, ever talked about my problems. And she was the first person. Actually, my parents never knew about these problems until 2018 when I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. So I gave a book to my dad beforehand and said, Dad, there's things that you don't know about me. And then he got that story. So he never knew that I was suicidal and things like that. Anyway,
we'll get back to that because I'm interested in what happened then. But I don't want to jump so much around in time. So you're 29, you're depressed, you're in a terrible place. You have the unspoken understanding that I'm not supposed to talk about my problems to anyone. No one cares about my problem anyways, I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. And who am I to reveal such deeply personal things to anyone? And yet you go to this pharmacist friend and you're probably in such an awful mental state that you cannot help but reveal yourself. That's what I'm picturing here.
So she's 20 years my senior, and she's a pharmacist, but she's also a listener, and she sees things. So she gets it out of me. And she one day came down into my shop with a piece of paper, a name and a number, and say, she's going to help you. The courage that woman had at that time to say to me, you need help. I rejected it straight away.
Obviously.
And 1 month later, I was sitting behind a large wooden desk with this very scary looking woman looking down at me with disdain, saying, what are you doing here? I was desperate enough to go and changed my life.
Was a coach, therapist, anything else?
She was an astrologist.
Okay.
That's why I rejected it in the first place as well.
Right.
So she's a psycho-astro consultant. Mm-hmm. Remember, we are here in the year 2000. Life coaching did not exist. You went to the psychologist or the psychiatrist. And that was good for my mom. She was ill. Not for me. I was not ill, even if I was suicidal, depressed. But that's what it does to you. You don't think yourself as ill. So when when she came up with an astrologer, that's for desperate people, But she never talked about my future. It's not about prediction. She was a coach. And I went to her 3 times, 2 hours. And that first question was, what are you doing here? And now if we link it back to that, she had me ask, what is the conflict? And I felt this conflict in me. There is one part going one side and the other goes that side. And I want that. That's what came up in me in that moment. I had never thought about, what I needed help with. I just went to see her because an astrologer is going to talk about what I need to do. But it was not like that.
It's interesting because I read that book. I think it's Lori Gottlieb who wrote You Need to Talk to Someone.
Yes.
I think that's the title, something along those lines. And in that, she's a therapist, psychologist, and she recounts how for every therapy session, the very first time, well, there's always a triggering event, but it's usually not the reason, the deeper reason that brings someone into seeking help. So also in your case, I think the question was basically what brought you here, but it's part of her job to reveal what on a foundational level led you to get into the state in which you are seeking help.
Yeah. And so that introspection was her question, what are you doing here? And it was the first question she asked me. She did not even say, hello, how are you? And so it's like, bam. And then you really sink deeper and deeper into your chair of shame nearly. But it was perfect. And then the next question was, okay, tell me your story. Retrospection. And that is where she showed me, through my story, she highlighted, but why did you think this? Why did you do that? And that is where she changed my perspective on those moments.
Which is incredible because it can take a long time. So she sounds like someone who absolutely knew what she was doing.
Yes.
And is able literally to connect the dots, but more importantly, help you connect the dots and help you see that, because then once you're able to connect those, you're able to construct a different continuation of those dots.
And so at the end of the 2 hours that I was with her, she gave me 3 questions. Again, no explanations, no guidelines. She said, Tom, you've been talking about your friends and that they are better than you and that you're nothing. Describe me for the next time in what they are better. The second question was, why do people come to you, like friends and other people come to you, but not to your friends? And the third question was, what have you done already that you say I wish I could do this for the rest of my life? Those moments of grace where time flows or where you say, where did time go? Describe me to them for the next time 4 weeks later. That is, again, like, what? I have problems today. Why do I need to talk about all of that? Took me 3 weeks in my misery to finally look at those questions because I was scared of her. I was scared of what she would do if I did not do my homework. I was deeply impressed by her, deeply somewhere, as a teacher or a director, somebody who is stern, and she was going to slap me, not physically, but verbally, and I didn't want that.
Let me just naively ask her a question. Was there some parallel with the way your dad would approach you with his expectation and but she would create a safe space where you were not afraid to run away, but afraid to disappoint her?
Yeah, maybe. I didn't see it at that time. I just, I was too much into my own little world and too afraid for the pain it would cause if I didn't do what I was asked to do. I was also very naive at the time, but it was good. That naivete was perfect when you look back.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't, yeah. And so I didn't answer those 3 questions. And you could say that it's like storytelling. You get these 3 questions, you do some storytelling about it, and then we discussed it together. And then she helped me filter out of those stories my potential. Because what I saw in my friends was actually resonating with what I had in me but had not developed. And it was communication. I thought my friends were great communicators. They always had things to tell about. They were like walking dictionaries. And I saw the parallels between different people in my environment, and I saw that they had the same qualities. And I always thought, I could never be like that. But that revealed as well that there was a teacher in me, a therapist, a communicator. So a teacher, communicator, teacher, researcher, and traveler.
So this is something that she helped you see in yourself to extract from the different life stories that these are the commonalities. This is what makes or would make the truly you.
Yeah, it's like therapists that I came from. From an early age, people came to me to talk about their problems. I was the psychologist of my mom from the age of 14, and even in my shop, people spontaneously came to talk about their problems. I did not ask for that. And
not just wine recommendations.
No. And I was always listening. But I consider it something bad, because go to Tom, you can unload your problems. And I really saw it as something that was negative about me.
Really?
Yeah. And I argued with her a long time. But this is so bad, I'm like a bin, you just load it off, and then Tom will deal with it, and she said, no, Tom, and she tried to see me, to teach me to see it differently, and I could not do it until she said, but Tom, you're a born therapist. People automatically resonate with you on some unconscious level, feel that they can trust you, do something with it. You see, it's like, what?
Leave me alone with this.
So that came from the speaking, the communication and the teaching. Mm-hmm. The shop was not doing well. I was trying to find a way to sell more wine, for example. So I created a workshop, 1 hour workshop on how to taste wine, because that did not exist. You can find about the terroir and about the grapes, but how to taste wine. And remember, it's nearly...
no idea how to taste wine. Okay.
So, remember, it's all before internet somewhere, right? So I had to find the books and I had my books laid out in my living room and created a presentation of 1 hour and a workshop after that. And then the first time when I gave that, I had written down every single word I had to say. I started my presentation. I ended an hour later, never looking at my papers. The people afterwards in the workshop say, so how many times have you done that? It's my first time. No, this can't be true, And so when I analyzed, her question, I was also mentioning that. Mm. Yeah, so the research was doing all the research on the topic, distilling that into a presentation, communication, And so it was a very revealing moment again, right? But again, no guidelines.
What do you attribute her success with you to? So was that because, you certainly were a good client or a good, I wouldn't call you a patient, but a good client, mm-hmm. in the sense that you actually did the homework. You actually did that introspection and those tasks. But was it her questions? Was it the safety she provided in that space?
That's very difficult to say, but she said, Tom, I give questions to many people. There is only less than 5% that actually answer them.
In terms of doing the homework,
yeah.
Or they are...
Yeah.
Because I think most people just run away. Like you said, you were afraid. I think we're all afraid to look at certain things we did, we said, or that happened to us. Yes. And you say, it's just too painful or too uncomfortable, or I'm too embarrassed, or I'm too ashamed. And therefore, you just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. There's also another perspective. We are used to... Is it extrapolate our problems? Somebody else must solve it. And it comes in a way, externalize. It's also, and maybe this is related, I'm not sure, but from when medicine became popular, the doctor said your health is my problem, not yours. So we have started to, put the responsibility outside of ourselves. For 12,000 years, we've also always looked at changing the environment to suit our needs. And this does not work. Your future is your future. What your behavior, and you are responsible. And we have somewhere lost this idea that we are responsible, that we need to do it. Nobody will do it for you. Nobody can do what, this retrospective part, this finding the problem and the solution is something very individual. Nobody can do it for you, but we need to see that again, that it is a responsibility.
I love what you're saying, and it very much resonates with me, because what essentially you're saying is you have agency, a lot of agency, and responsibility. Meaning, what you're saying, as I understand it, is do not outsource it. Do not expect miracles with a magic pill or with a doctor or whoever other outside helper. They can take you as far, but there's a certain part that you need to do yourself. And if you're not willing to do that, and in your case, that was the introspection, that was the reflection, and ultimately how it shifted your entire perspective. Yes. But not expecting everything to come from outside, because it's just bound to fail.
Yeah. And my first initial step was going to the astrologer for her to solve my problems. But
to solve your problem,
yeah.
Right? But I think even the term solving it had to shift, because solving doesn't mean she's going to do it for you.
No.
She can show you the path, but ultimately you need to walk that road.
Yeah. And in a way, she didn't even show me the path. She got the path out of me.
Right. Unlocked
the path in me. And that is the cue here today, in this fast-changing world where our environment is moving forward much faster than we are. And this is what most of our stress comes from. And this conflict between biology and culture. We biologically have not changed, and our environment is changing very fast, creating evolutionary mismatches that we need to start learning to deal with. And we have to do one thing is, we cannot control our environment anymore, but we can learn to control ourselves to deal with that environment. So we are really in an era of shifting. And I'm glad I started this 25 years ago to be ready today. So what I'm doing also, and what we're doing here, is by putting all of this into context, introspection, retrospection, introspection, finding my potential, to go into prospection. What is that doing? It's creating a basis. A DNA does not alter for the future. Because by finding your potential, by asking these questions that nobody can answer for you, we can just give you the questions, is to do the homework, to find that basis on which you can build a solid foundation that will be there for the rest of your life. And this, my potential. So I'm a therapist, communicator, teacher, researcher, and traveler. I need movement in my life. The last question she gave me was, imagine an ideal day in 10 years' time. And so, again, I had problems in that moment. Why think about the future? Can't you see that, I'm struggling financially, personally? Who cares about tomorrow? But again, I was afraid of her. And I did what she asked. And from the story I wrote that we discussed, there is one phrase that stuck. I'm a therapist who has developed his own approach, research, who has written a book about it, and who is asked around the world to give presentations and workshops. That's where it started. That was the future I wanted, and thought that the conflictual situation I was in, that would create the harmony that I was seeking, because if I had that as potential, that would be for the rest of my life with me. Why would I have that if not to give it a purpose? And this is what we are talking about here as well. It's like, instead of waiting for purpose to come to us, which it doesn't, is to give life a purpose. And instead of seeing it as a noun, some destination, we need to make purpose into a verb. Like the future. The future is not some destination you arrive at. It's something you create through your choices, decisions, and actions. So it's a verb. It's something you put into action.
Hence movement.
Hence movement. And this is how it all started.
It's fascinating. So how do we then get to Tom, the osteopath?
Again, the pharmacist.
Okay.
She invited me one day to a presentation on kinesiology, which is muscle testing. And as soon as I saw this lady talk...
Hang on a second. Just to clarify two terms, because I was often confused in the past. Now I have a bit more clarity in my mind between the kinesiotherapist, right?
Yes.
The kinesiotherapist, which is basically like, I don't know.
Physiotherapist.
Physiotherapist, essentially, is the English part of it. But then you have the kinesiolog.
Yes.
Which is a very different thing.
Yeah. It's a
So
complementary health practice where they do muscle testing as a sort of decoder of your body. And so a muscle is strong, a muscle is weak. So they can ask questions to the body and the body will answer. And you believe that or you don't believe that, but it's like you can go into communication with what is going on in the body.
So it's got a lot more with emotional states.
It can even go into cellular messages and things like that. At the end, everything is energy, and everything is frequency. So when you're asking a question, it's also a frequency. And you're just seeing from how does that respond to you. It's a bit based on Chinese medicine.
Yeah, so it's quite a different thing from your classic physiotherapy. So the pharmacist reappears. Like in a drama, right? Like scene 2, pharmacist back from left end. Okay.
She took me to see this lady, present her work, and basically it was an introduction also to her workshops.
Who is her?
The kinesiologist.
Ah, okay, right.
Which was living a few streets away from the Delhi. And when I saw that, I resonated with it straight away because I had been treated twice by kinesiology in my past very successfully. In one session, my problems had been gone. And so when I saw that, I also resonated with it because that was the therapy that I maybe could do. And also, I didn't need a medical degree to do that. I could start that straight away. The link therapy and manual therapy is actually that I also wrote in one of the stories. So the one thing, why do people come to you and not to your friends? Actually, I wrote down also that during New Year, when all the aunties are sitting on a table and I'm going to listen in, so I'm standing behind them and I put my hands on their shoulders. It was something that I did automatically. And automatically my thumb started to massage the backs. And then when I would leave, they say hey, don't leave, continue. And for some reason, that came up in me as well when I was answering those questions she gave me and thinking that if somebody who hasn't got the touch, they put their hands on your shoulder and say, leave me alone. And with me, it was stay. And that's how actually manual therapy became quite clear that it was something to do with my hands. And now when I saw that, and when she was talking about kinesiology, and I saw that you didn't need a medical degree, I said, I'm going to try that. First lesson or the second, I can't remember exactly. And she said to me, have you done this before? And I said, no, but it's like, it's so natural. Yeah. I was in my element. I felt great. For me, it was like, this is easy. And I saw my colleague who was in the course as well, struggling. I said, wow, I like this. Oh, but if you do this, you have to do that. And I was gone. And then I did a year of different courses that I could while keeping my shop alive still. And then at the end, I went back to the astrologer. I said, do I have to become a doctor? Because this is too great. And that's the only time when the astrologer gave me a clear answer. And she said, no. She said, from medicine, doctor, no. But what is for you is Chinese medicine, or osteopath probably will be closer to you. And I was thinking, I have no experience with Chinese medicine, but I had been treated by a kinesiologist osteopath.
So you already had some notion what that
and then you think, isn't life retrospectively interesting to see from how all of these things link to get you
to where you need to be?
To be? I don't know, but it's like magic.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is, because then you look back and you realize that, damn, there was a signal there, which I didn't really pick up at the time, but it stayed with me. And then there was another signal there, and somebody said something, and a person came into my life at one point, and I had no idea at the time. I didn't attribute a lot of importance to it. But then now I look at it, actually all of it were little messengers ushering me towards the direction I need to be.
Isn't that amazing? You know, when you start looking at those things, and now I'm seeing them in the future as well, that things are being prepared for me, that are coming, which is interesting as well. And yeah, so then again, I was not a physiotherapist. I had no medical background, and I wanted to be an osteopath. So
first, define what's an osteopath.
Osteopath is a manual therapist who sees the body as one whole, and also sees that structure and function are related. And so there is a structure, so there might be a structural problem, which can create a functional problem.
Okay, so give some examples.
So you've broken your arm, and then you can't move your arm.
So structure and function, so the structure is the architecture of it,
yeah.
and the function is what it does, or
yes.
what it cannot do in some cases, if it's broken.
It's like
or
structure is your blood vessels, but then when there is a problem with your blood vessels, then of course the function of it cannot work as well, right? And so with a lot of problems in the body, so if a vertebrae is compressed, and then you have a bulging disc, and then you have a nerve ending. Right? So that nerve ending gives a functional movement that will be painful. So you need to relieve the structure so that the function of what it must do can improve again. But sometimes it's reverse. Sometimes it's a functional problem. For example, with an organ, and that it doesn't work very well. For example, your stomach is not really digesting very well because of a nervous problem, for example, the vagus nerve that is compressed. So you need to see from how can we improve this function, and then it will be structural better as well. So there is a relationship between these two. So osteopaths look at the whole body to improve the structure and the function of something, of what is in blocking. But it's not only of what I've discovered as well, is that when we're doing that on the body, there are also functional, behavioral improvements.
Behavioral?
Yes.
As in?
Better thinking, clearer thinking, less stress experience, decision-making. Sometimes, when one is in front of a problem and one needs to make a choice and one doesn't know, and then they come to my practice for a physical problem, and then after they say, from Tom, remember that time that I came for that physical problem? I also had some questions and I needed to make a decision. I didn't know what. Exactly after your treatment, I knew exactly what to do and not to do. What did you do? That was my first experiences in the practice. I had no idea how it was linked. And that became my specialty again.
Because I think everybody has intuition. Just most people don't tap into it, or they don't see it, or they conceal it, or a lot of things. There are a lot of layers on top that make it hard to access. And I think part of what you do by basically helping reconfigure the body in the sense that, well, you say energy, but the physiological functions work properly. So when you're more aligned in a physical, biological sense, that helps you to a great extent to start listening to your intuition, which often works well.
Yeah. And also,
how do you see that?
Also, what we said earlier on, functionally, in a stress response, when you have pain, your vascularization of your brain changes. So, but if this is a constant, because of the demands on you, when the demands are higher than your resources, then that creates stress. Or I call it, if your biological footprint is too high, like the ecological footprint, when you demand too much from Earth than the Earth can resource, you have a problem. If you ask too much from your body than your body can resource or deal with, then you also have a problem. And this translates into stress, into tension, and then, of course, changes in vascularization, changes in function of your brain. So when we then work on the structural part, relieving that tension, relieving or creating a balance, a reset in the autonomic nervous system, then suddenly, those vascularization improves and the function of your brain improves.
Therefore,
you can think better and make better decisions. So we can start making decisions again with your future in mind. In a stress response, you are only thinking about now. And the stress response is prehistoric. It has not had an update. And that is the problem of today, because we have many more demands. We have less time to relax and recuperate. We are still somewhere functioning as if we need to run after an animal for dinner or away from it, not to be dinner. And that is for, I don't have any internet. It's completely useless, that reaction. But our body, from this evolutionary mismatch idea, this trait that we have and use automatically, has not had an update. Because we have to think about 10 to 12,000 years as 2 seconds on a 24-hour clock of our evolution. That's not enough time for making a change. And so today's problems, most of the physical problems that I have in my practice, so neck, shoulder, back pain, are not related to an accident, nor any kind of traumatic experience. They just say I wake up and it's there. I moved a little bit and I got stuck and I got pain. You don't treat this the same way as a structural problem, because it's not a structural, let's say, muscular problem, because there is no physical trauma. It's a stress response overload. Right? So the stress response is not functioning anymore. It's functioning in a bad way, in a fight and flight way, which is tension in neck and shoulders and the psoas, and that's why everything stays tense. Then you do one movement and suddenly you're stuck.
Exactly. Well, I had a similar. Well, I actually went to an osteopath a couple of months ago, and that was after a period when it was a lot of stress, a huge amount of work, and a lot of traveling as well, which again is a physical thing, but with that, with time zone change, with the stress of the traveling. So it's not so much the discomfort of an airplane seat, but it's the stress of the traveling, about making sure you're on time and all the other things with it. And then I went to work out, and then I was dead. So my muscles and everything, my whole body was like in this medieval nights, like you can barely move like that. But again, it wasn't. That was just the final drop, because it was the accumulation of this. Now, this was more of a lifestyle thing, but I'm sure you have lots of patients and others you work with who it's not so much the lifestyle in the sense of their physical activities, but the stress of their daily lives, or bad relationships, or financial difficulties, and the whole other things.
And so when I first started as an osteopath in 2007,
So now we're at that point. Okay.
Yeah,
now
we're
get to
at
the
that
osteopath
point.
beginnings.
Because again, luck was that when I started looking for an osteopathy school to train, actually one opened in Brussels. Can you believe that? It's like... So in 2007, I became then an osteopath. And when I started working as an osteopath, I was already expressing something very different, which I did not realize. Because my patients said, we come to you for physical problems, but why can't we think better? Some people said it's like I have more time. More time, What? Yeah, it's like
that strange physical space, which is Tom's cabinet, and then some metaphysical change happens.
And it's like better thinking, same amount of stress, but not really making that a problem anymore. More time. It's like, for months I haven't been doing my meditations. I had no time. After your session, I just had more time. It's like, what? And they were asking me, what did you do? Because we had that with you, but I never had that with another osteopath. And then the second questions come. Why do people come to you and not to your colleagues? And what did they say about you? And that they say that they don't have somewhere else. And so that's where I had to look. And that's where I realized, okay, now I have to listen and I have to find out what this is. And this became then what I call the Reaset Approach. The Reaset Approach is the return to ease approach.
Return to ease.
Mm-hmm. And so you have
EASE.
SE. And so it's REASET. Not a reset from a button on a computer. No, this is the return to ease, which ease is, I've placed it between stress and relaxation. And ease is where you are able to adapt. When you walk over the street and a car comes, you need to jump. When you see your bed, you need to sleep. Okay? So at ease in the army is also relaxed, but you are alert. But you can jump as soon as the colonel or the guy that says to you what you need to do, that you act. But adaptation is the key word. We need to be able in a state of adaptation. We need to be able to adapt and manage change. If we're not, if we're too relaxed, that's when we walk over the street. Nice car, I like it in red. Boof, too late. When we are too stressed, we might actually be not moving at all anymore. Paralyzed, frozen. So the health is your capacity to adapt and manage change.
I remember the word homeostasis, but I'm absolutely not sure I'm using it right. You to tell.
Homeostasis is very small changes to keep the balance. But homeostasis particularly with very small changes. You have the next stage is allostasis. It's where adrenaline and cortisol, sometimes you need peaks of that. So much broader changes to keep the balance. I created another one, eustasis. And eustasis is the balance between you and the environment. The good balance. EU is good. So the good balance, that is what we need. We don't need work-life balance. That's part of eustasis. But we need balance in so many other things, not just work-life balance. And so I created this other word to have people also have words and concepts that we need to now integrate into our lives, each individual. Because it's not done for you. So you have your biological footprint, which is important to know. What are all the elements that take demands from me? Do I have enough resources? Maybe I need to reduce some of my biological footprint. When you're traveling a lot, and then you see that a lot with people that just moved to Brussels and to work in the institutions,
EU institutions?
EU institutions, or maybe at NATO, when they move, their life change units, they call it. So these are the units of stress with every single change. For example, the death of a spouse is 100 points, vacation is 12, but moving house, moving country, moving culture, moving to find the shops where you need, the administration, better salary.
Administration is here, is like 120, right?
You have new responsibilities, new status in finances, and so forth. If you're this is a list, life change units. It's called the Holmes and Raha life change units list. It's made in 1960s. So if you count all of that, you have more than 300 points on this list. And when you have more than 300 points, the likelihood that you have an illness or an accident is increased with 70%.
And I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so this is what you were saying, and I was thinking it straight away from life change units, that in those 6 months or a year that you probably increased those life change units and you didn't balance them out enough. That caused that you were suddenly, your stress response was in a sort of an autonomic lesion, which could not go down by itself. And then there is one little drop, one little thing. You pull a bar in the gym and you're stuck.
It reminds me also back in 2017, it was, when I had at the end of that year, started a very, very difficult burnout for me. And that basically, if I take your scoring system, well, now looking back, it's pure common sense. But of course, this is a much more methodological, more scientific way of looking at it. But I was running a huge amount of projects, working in so many different jobs or in different functions. Plus we moved, and then we had our third son born. So all of that you add up, I mean, the birth of a child plus moving in and by itself is already a huge thing, let alone all the others. And where I was going to go with this is to say that there's probably some multiplier about your ability or capacity to handle stress. Because if you are more of an anxious person or someone who internalizes a lot of that, but doesn't necessarily channel it in some healthy way, it probably makes it far worse. Because other people are just more resistant to stress, or they're just much more able to handle it. How do you see this?
Sure, but how many times have we seen now that the most unlikely person to get a burnout gets a burnout? And so we sometimes see that even the persons that we don't think about it, that we consider that they're less prone to it, fall prone to it. And that is because of the body is just not evolved enough to deal with all of the things that we put onto it.
Well, maybe let me challenge you the way you formulate it. I don't question for a second what you're saying, but to say that the body has not evolved, as if the body should be expected to evolve, right? It's the other side of the equation where the body is what it is. It hasn't changed for millions of years or for extremely minimal way. It's what we put in it. It's the balance is, this is a constant to a large degree. You can enhance it in biochemical ways. Not necessarily you should, but you could. But still, it's a relatively constant thing. What you put on it, you increase and you increase, plus the environment that you spoke about in which we live today.
I would challenge that. I challenge that because what we know today is that your DNA, and I'm talking about the biological DNA here, maybe not doesn't change, but the way it expresses itself can be changed. So that's epigenetics. And that is about behavior and environment. Behavior and environment actually influence the epigenetic coding that will create the expression of the gene.
Right.
And so what we've always believed is that we cannot influence our DNA, and that the future is what the future is going to be, and that que sera, sera, and that also that our evolution is something that we don't control. It's mutation, natural selection, but science is challenging that through the epigenetic coding. It's behavior and environment that is more important than the DNA itself. So they say about 2% is DNA, the rest is behavior and environment.
In terms of what gets activated, what gets pronounced more.
And so what is going to happen? So if we change our behavior and environment and we take more responsibility about our biological footprint on an individual level, and if we are going to surround ourselves with a more health-promoting, future-promoting, adaptive promoting behavior or environment, then we will steer ourselves into a different direction. For that, we need to know where we need to go to. And this is what I'm thinking about today. What do we as humans need, which collectively need, that we can start developing to be more in a eustasis with our environment? Because it comes to the same 4 steps: introspection, retrospection, introspection, and prospection. So what is the problem? Is this evolutionary mismatch? What do we want? We want eustasis. We want that this mismatch is again matched. Where does this come from? We have this evolution that has not been stimulated in a direction. We have let it loose and by itself. Introspection, what do we have that we can develop to create that eustasis? And now by prospecting is like, this is, if we do this, I wake up in the morning and this is the life that we're going to have through behavior and environment. This will create the life that we actually want and the future that we want. And we're going to direct our evolution by giving a destination.
And then these 4 line up properly, because then it can create a very positive dynamic.
And then we are going to change how we evolve on purpose. So from
by design.
Yeah, so from, with, and on purpose.
So from purpose, on purpose?
From, with, and on purpose.
From, with, and on purpose.
Yeah.
Because just to go back to the earlier point, when we talk about balance, so I think the introspection is where you actually bring that awareness to realize that, hey, I'm charging too much on my body, on my life, in the way I live, in the tensions that I bring in, or the way I react to those, and you can decrease that. So that's where you create that balance. And the balance doesn't mean I'm a Zen Buddhist meditating all day, but the proportions are right.
Yeah. And so with that retrospective view, and you say from, okay, what is it that brings that we are not in balance today, or that I'm not in balance today? And then we can do through introspection, we say from, okay, we can start making some decisions. But also we say from what potential do we have to be able to adapt better with the changing environment that we don't control anymore? And I wrote an article, it's on LinkedIn, Lost in Control, because we are so used to trying to control our environment. But now with AI and technology, that's an exponential change. That's like a thoroughbred horse that is running away from us, and we're trying to run after it, but we cannot catch up, and it will just run faster if you run after it. So we have to stop running. We have to start controlling ourselves, how we are dealing with that environment, and we need to deal with it in a different way. So for that also we need to find that potential within us that we have collectively. But it's the individual that need to change. And it's like voting. From an individual perspective, if you vote, what is my vote? That one vote that's not important. Yeah. But from a collective, from a societal level, that one vote is important. And this is what we also need to understand, that our behavior, our individual behavior, is important. Every step we take as an individual has consequences on the larger whole. We are holons. We are the individual, and we are a part and a whole at the same time. And this is where we need to let's say, this is where we are making the difference. And look at COVID. COVID, in a way, is a few people changed the world, right? Did they think of changing the world? If the optimist says there's some people in the market and that changed the world, or and the negative people say it's in the lab, or whatever it is, again, it's a few people that change the world through a snowball effect, which we all have responsibility.
I want to come back for two things. One is the word control, which I think is very important here, where you might want to control your external environment, which to a large degree you cannot. But then to what degree is it healthy or is it advisable to control yourself? Because you have a certain control on your diet, or the exercise, and again, the lifestyle that you're leading, which you may have very difficult circumstances. So then your control is more limited, but still there are millions of choices we make every day in the kind of activities we do or the media we consume and all the rest. But what is a healthy balance between controlling and letting go? And then we'll come back to the part and the whole. That's my other topic.
Yeah, it's some patients ask me as well, what can I do? And it's a very difficult question, right? Because what is control? But we have to, as we said before, and started this conversation, which it's about perspective. We have to start to learn that we can have different perspectives through which we see, through which the lens that we are going to see what is happening. And by that is also control. And it's from this creating this adaptation, creating how we are seeing the world, that everything is not black and white necessarily, but that we control how we react to something. Because yes, there is work. Yes, there is micromanagement. And we still need to deal with all of that, right? But how we deal with it, say from, okay, we need to analyze what is happening. Then do I need to make a choice? Don't stick with it. And so leave the golden cage sometimes is necessary. Yeah.
Is the word control the best one here? Because there's a lot, we could say deliberate decision. We could say...
Yeah. But don't soften it. Don't soften it too much because that,
No, because for me, in control, there's a bit of coercion where I say, well, if I control you, that's probably not good for you. I control a machine, but not a human. So control, I'm a bit mixed of the linguistics here.
You're totally right. But it's also from what value do you put on control?
That's right.
You put, you see control in that way. I see control in a different way. And
as being in charge,
my
own
exactly
life, of my own decisions.
So there it's interesting to see the differences. So control is not a negative thing in my eyes. But of course,
I think it's very contextual because I do control the temperature in the room, or I do control, let's say, if someone is a very negative person, whether I do not want him or her in my life. So that's also a control because it's a self-preservation and self-respect. But then controlling others is for the most part a pretty negative thing. But let's go back to the other topic, because you said something really interesting of how the different units work together with larger units, and we can say how our cells constitute our bodies and ultimately create our physical self, but we as individuals then on a societal level. And all of this is in a constant interaction.
Yes.
Where your inner organic systems are interacting with the larger body, and that's your profession, where you're trying to help with those where they are stuck somewhere, whether physically or in a broader sense. And then we as individuals, how we relate to the society. And with your 4 spections, like dash spections, that's what you are looking at, where you are in harmony in a health physical sense, but then also in your relational level with your social circles and social circles. So how does that all come together? Maybe looking at specifically your osteopathic hat. What it says.
It's very interesting. I have different hats. So I'm an osteopath. I'm a writer.
I'll pause you here for a second because your book is here. So we'll show that to the camera. So the first one is The Futures Effect. Okay, so that's one book, it's available on Amazon, right?
It's available on Amazon today.
And here's the other one, Futurize Yourself.
So
and that's your earlier book?
Yeah, so this is like my backstory. You see the...
part of which we've heard
today. And the second one is then more the mind, the reflection. So you could see body, mind, The third one I'm still writing. It's Spirit, because it's a trilogy.
So now that's in the making right now.
That's in the making. It's in my head, but I have two other books to write first. So
it needs to manifest itself.
Yeah, and
but
so
when it does, we'll have you back here, and then you'll share.
Thank you.
Some ideas on that.
And so, and also I give presentations about futurizing yourself, the futures effect, and so forth. But all of that comes together because it's all part of the story of evolution, our body in a fast-changing world. And from how are we going to deal and cope with a world that is changing exponentially. And so, yes, as you said rightfully, I also started to see from, hey, I have cells. Cells make the muscles or make an organ, and the organ that is a total works together with making me. What if every cell was an individual? And then, like, I'm an individual in a larger whole. And I saw these comparisons. And once you start thinking like that, you start to see that, but we are not alone. And as you see, if you pick that book up again, you see the book.
Which one?
Yeah, this one, the Futures Effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see, there is, it's change your story, change, and what it says there?
Our, yeah.
Future. And so your and our, so your Y apostrophe our, your and our future. Because what you do, what I do, is not only an effect on myself, it has an effect on other people. And so, and this is where that whole-on idea also finds itself. So everything I do, I know that when I treat a patient, I treat a family.
I love that.
And I'm around the world very quickly. Because if I treat a person in front of me and they're well, they go home, the relationship with their spouse or children changes. Also, they're probably concerned when they have pain. And so that concern falls away. Then the spouse may be making a phone call to South Africa for work. Now, that is on a completely different basis because he's less worried, so probably has less anxiety, is in a more positive frame. And then he makes that call, which will be on a different emotional level that the person in South Africa will receive that, which may change what he does in or she does in his life.
Full butterfly effect on display.
So this is what I've known already for more than a decade, how my work translates itself into something universal.
Much larger.
Yeah.
But
that means we all have that. It's not just me. We all have that effect on other people.
I very much resonate with that. And at the same time, unfortunately, it goes the other way as well.
It goes.
Because if you do damage, if somebody with bad intent or by negligence or incompetence does a similar effect, that can also have a negative ripple effect. So I think once you realize that there's a lot of responsibility in your hand, which also most likely gives you a very deep sense of purpose. So a little bit going back to why you got into what you do and why you seem to be very much at ease and in your place. And I think that's a great vibe that I pick up, and I think people you interact with pick up, where that for your own inner story, for your own inner life, way beyond just the professional part, gives a very deep sense of purpose.
Yeah. I've given my life a purpose. That's the difference. Before I was waiting for purpose to come to me, but now I realize that no, it doesn't work like that. I have to give my life purpose, and I build that purpose from within on purpose because I know my potential. I've done the homework on which I can base, because if you have a purpose in life, why wouldn't it be based on your potential that you're born with and die with? And so I made these relationships from, okay, if I put that into a life, it probably gives me more meaning and purpose. And it did. I'm doing this now 25 years, and I can say yes, it works. But it's also, when we come back to that kind of negative part, remember that the more stressed people are, the more that the vascularization in the brain changes, it also changes your mood and makes you more anxious and makes you more selfish. And so there is a lot of problems going on today. And I did an article with a German journalist once about elections. Does stress affect the vote? And it does.
For sure it does.
It does.
And obviously politicians know all too well who fear totally changes the way you see the world, and therefore the way you vote, the way you make choices. Yeah. So that's for sure.
And so we have to work on that stress response for many, for positive behavior, for evolution, but also what do we want at the end of the day? Don't we want to feel content, fulfilled, and healthy? Yes. And, that is not something that is given to you. You will probably find that into your, that your potential, if you start expressing that, and that you are giving yourself also, or bringing yourself into aspirations, or defining your aspirations. So a DNA is health, what do you want to feel, what are your aspirations, and the bonds are there to create what you want to feel and what you aspire towards.
How do you find it? Because I think some people might be asking themselves, okay, I'm a little lost in life, or maybe totally and utterly lost, and I'm desperately trying to find my purpose. I hear what you're saying. And then they might try it in a very mental exercise. Because you did do a lot of introspection through these questions and saying, okay, where am I coming from? What are those points that I need to look at? It's to a large degree an intellectual, at least at the beginning, an intellectual exercise. But then you do try to think about your own personality and life experiences and all the rest. So how do you do this practically?
Well, I think there are many ways. But first, the four things that we need to do, the 4 steps, is introspection, retrospection, introspection, and prospection. But behind that is, do I need help with it? I could not do it on my own. I needed help. But before you get help, how is my body? Am I in a stress response? You can't make good decisions, or you can't, think properly if your body is in a state of stress. And many people today forget that element. They go to a psychologist or a coach, but without passing through that kind of autonomic balancing first, which makes it difficult for them to do the exercises, makes it difficult to think. But also, for example, the coach says, yes, you do have to do some meditation or some breathing exercises. In a stress response, right, when you do mindfulness, for example, some people get more anxiety from that. And then they say, mindfulness is not for me. Hang on a bit. If your body is in a state of stress permanently, so there is an autonomic lesion in the body, that means it cannot relax itself anymore. It is acting as you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, and then you're going to sit down and do, what do you think your body is going to do? No way you're going to do that. I'm going to create anxiety, so you get away, because it has not learned that, this evolutionary mismatch is there. So if you calm the system first through body treatment, because there is no button, and there is not one place where that autonomic nervous system can be reset.
Or paused.
And if somebody says, yes, but it's vagal stimulations, vagus nerve is one parasympathetic nerve out of many. But if you push the vagus nerve, but the sympathetic nervous system is not coming down, then you create other problems. Then you have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic high, which is chaos in the body.
What about cortisol?
Well, cortisol is from the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So this is always in binomial with the autonomic nervous system. So you have adrenaline and cortisol made by the serenal glands. And again, when cortisol comes into the body from the adrenal gland, what it will do, it will stop insulin of stocking energy. So when you're continuous in a stress response, there is no stock of energy, and then that is left into the bloodstream, and most of the time it will produce fat. Okay, so you become fatter. But at one stage, it will affect the hippocampus, because the hippocampus has a receptor of cortisol to say, make more, make less, but that's that part of the brain that gets the vascularization changes, and so that receptor starts malfunctioning, and you keep on creating cortisol even if, in a relaxed state, so to speak.
If you're in this constant chronic stress, you don't need stressors after a certain point to be in stress.
Exactly.
So you are in stress even in a relaxed state, even when you're lying in bed, even when you're in a sauna or whatever, walking.
That's what I call an autonomic lesion, and that's when things starts to go haywire. That's the moment where if that continues, then burnout will follow, or that you wake up one day and you're stuck with your neck or your shoulders. That's that state. Yeah. And then
body sends a red alert to say, hello, listen to me.
That's when you do mindfulness and say no, and that creates more anxiety. That's when you do breathing exercises and they don't work. That's because you're in that autonomic lesion where the body cannot reduce itself. And then they give the good advice of vagal stimulation, but it will not work. Then they give advice on go to the sauna or do this and that, and then it won't work because sauna is a stress factor. You can only go to the sauna for its benefits if you're able to adapt. Otherwise, it becomes a stress factor.
Essentially, first you start with getting your body, not so much, taking care of your body, but not so much healing it in a very large sense, but getting it into a state so you can actually go further on that path of the introspection and the other types of
it needs to be able to be in a state of adaptation. It needs to be in that state of ease, because that is the way that then also the brain is going to function better. So we remember structure, function, so that the function of the brain is optimized, so that you can think again, that you can do the retrospection, that you can do the prospection, which is not probably in a stress response all about now.
If you want to bike from here to Mechelen.
No, I'm in Tomberg.
Right, okay. Just to motivate from where we are now. And you have your bike, and if it basically, the chain is off and there are no brakes, you cannot look at the beautiful scenery or enjoy the fresh air until on a very basic functional level, that device is capable of actually rolling. Hence the analogy, right? Like if your body is just not able to start thinking about those past experiences and trying to introspect and plan the future and all the rest, well, that's at the very basic. But I guess once you do that, I think you raise a very important point where, sometimes or often you need an external perspective. You need someone to guide you. And more often than not, a good question is worth 1,000 responses, right? The question opens up a certain way of looking at things that was totally obscure to you.
I could never have done it on my own. I would not be here, I think. That's clear to me. But it's also I know it's difficult to ask for help. I've been there, I've rejected it, and I've done it. But it's not a failure to ask for help. Today we're living in this conflictual world between our biology and culture. There's a new era. It's a new era in our evolution. It's happening right now, and we're in it. And we can't copy the past for the problems that are today, here. We need new solutions. And also we need to step away from this failure feeling, and that we can't use others for ourselves. It's a bit like AI. We are using AI not to augment ourselves, but just to help us sometimes to do things better, right? The body, as we said before, in the holon, I'm not alone. We are here with many people. If there is something wrong in the electricity in my house, I cannot solve that. I need help.
When it comes to our own health problems, if it's a purely, really, say, our bodily and physical health, well, going to a doctor is of course, the immediate response. But when it comes to issues which it's hard to put your finger on it. Like in your case, when you said, well, I'm at a great discomfort, you were totally depressed, the deli and all that. But it's hard to actually say, what is it that is off? And those issues, plus, let me add that, if you have, for any reason, the conviction, well, that I don't deserve this, or I'm not supposed to do this, or if I ask someone to help me with these emotional, mental, physical issues, that means I'm weak. That means I'm not. There's a mismatch between who I think I am or I would like to be, but who I actually am in that moment. And when you actually realize it, you either need to be so miserable to say, okay, this cannot go on like this anymore. Or you just stretch it until you actually get to that point where you have no choice. So that is to say that many people have that inner conviction, false conviction, obviously, that it reflects bad on them, or that there is this personality mismatch, like I said, and that they don't do it.
And there is also this factor that as I believe that as well, if I can't help myself, nobody can. That's a false assumption. That's a metaphor that is completely wrong, and that I also needed to revise. And then with the experience, I see from my God, that I can't do that anymore. And now, and that is also the interesting when you futurize yourself. Right? That's that concept with the 4 steps.
Would you say future-proofing yourself or
No.
futurizing? So
No,
define what you mean by futurize.
Futurize. So it's to first do the introspection, retrospection, introspection, prospection, and is to creating all of that so that you have a basis to have that DNA for your future, and that you imagine that's the future that I want. That is actually what I would like to wake up to one day. And then let that be pull you forward instead of pushed forward into destiny unknown. So that
more deliberate way
of so on purpose, the deliberate way of saying this is what I want, and then I'm going to align my choices, decisions, and actions towards that, because there is many hands that are reaching out to you. Which one do you know is good for you or not good for you?
Choice, decision,
and actions. If you don't know where you're going, it's difficult to make the right choices, or do you find yourself in a loop and you're right in the loop. And that is what futurizing yourself is finding from, okay, I need that basis first to build on, and what do I want to build with it, so that things come to you, or that you need to make choices, decisions, and actions, that at least you have a direction. Because there is one thing that is very important. There is also moments in your life where, and still now, where I feel stuck. But at least what I can do now is step back. So I step back.
So you have a toolkit that you can apply when you realize that, okay, I don't know the answer, but I have ways of trying to work towards an answer.
And then you step back. Then you take the overview perspective. Sometimes in that moment you feel stuck, but then when you look from the overview perspective, you say from actually, I've evolved, but here is something happening. And is it because I deviated from my path? Or is it because I need to learn something? Because evolving is not always an easy path, right? If you go to the gym to get strong muscles, you don't do that with, something that weighs 100 grams. There is resistance. You need resistance to get to that next level of yourself. But how do you know that it's resistance, or that it's that you've deviated from your path, or that it's for your growing, unless you know where you're going? And that is the important part as well, that you are able, with futurizing yourself, to step back and observe and see what is happening. And for me, it's very important. I know some people, like my father is an artist, right? And many people don't like structure. I need it. I needed this so badly, and now it's, for me, that is my lifesaver, right?
System and structure.
System and structure.
Because I see the way you approach all of this, you put a name on it, you put a system around it, so you can work with it.
Yeah, and is it limiting me? No. It's like in-the-box thinking. It makes you very creative. And what do I get from it? Well, I get from it that I am content, fulfilled, and healthy, relatively. And that my aspirations are being fulfilled because I made that choice. And because I established what are they? What does that mean for me?
You mentioned your dad, so let me actually follow up on that earlier question, because you mentioned that it was only through your book that you revealed a very difficult part of your life. So how did he react?
The first reaction of my dad was, it was not always easy to read. That was it. He never elaborated further onto that. So until I asked him, but how did you see me? And that's when he told me the story. And it is one sentence. Some people get children, and then it's all about the child. That was not me. If you wanted to do something with me, that was okay, and if not, that was okay. That's all I got as an answer. But that was enough for me to understand my dad. And it's good. Yes, in the beginning, I wanted him to react, and I wanted him to, to be more responsive.
To tell you this much, he gave you
he gave me that much. Yes.
That did what it had to do.
It did what it had to do. And for me, that I had to learn that my dad's functioning is the way he functions. I function very differently. But once I start to see and accept how he is.
I saw this beautiful quote from in a doctor's cabinet that I had to go several times in the past. An actual stomatologist, right? Like the facial everything, and it says, "Form follows function." So form follows function. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and function follows form. Creates form. Structure and function are interrelated.
Yes,
it's
I think
it's in both sides.
Very bidirectional in that sense. So tell me one last thing before we close our conversation, which I think we covered a lot of ground. Yes. So you're a public speaker as well. And what is it that you talk about? Now, certainly around these topics, but do you have some specific speeches or areas that you address?
Yeah. At the moment, I'm focusing my public speaking more into workshops to training manual therapists and osteopaths, physiotherapists into this reset approach because of their basis is still 19th, 20th century based, the way they treat people.
Is it the methods they use in the very specific work they do?
Yeah.
Or it's more the mindset around it?
For me, it's both parts. So today, physiotherapists and osteopaths are trained in 19th, 20th century techniques developed for their time, which was more physical trauma related. And today, of course, these the musculoskeletal problems that most people have are not physical trauma related, but autonomic related. So I'm giving them a course, a 4-day course, into bringing this autonomic resetting into their work. That is my main task at the moment, where I see that I have the most effect, and because we need to help people to get better very quickly and back adaptable. So the more osteopaths and manual therapists that I can train, the more people that will benefit from this new approach, which functions and works really well, because the manual therapists are struggling today with their old techniques. and find, and that is their response that they give me. And when I ask, do your techniques that you have work as well as before? And that's before 2020. And then they're saying no, they're really changing. But for the rest, I'm also, having like conversations like this. And I prefer people, they invite me to come and speak, to have questions, and then we have conversations about all of these topics that we've talked about. How are we going forward and cope and manage this fast-changing world? What can we do? And bringing it all back into this evolutionary perspective, and then bringing it into these concrete steps of what can you do for yourself to have the life that you want. Longevity. We've built 20 years to our lives in a couple of generations, and so we have added years to our life, but not life to our years.
I like that.
So
I mean, I don't like the substance of it, but I like the way you formulated it, because that extra 10, 20 years, which is wonderful that people live so much longer,
and so
but the quality of it may not be there.
Yeah, and so I'm bringing from what are all the elements in simple words, as we've been doing now as well, and in a structured way, so that we can start putting those life to years. I'm also part of what's called the Healthgevity Nation. These are people, a collective of people that are thinking about longevity. And there are some people in our group that want to live 1,000 years, and they're doing all the extreme things. But I love them for their passion, because that will filter back into something that all of us can use. But I'm learning also from them what Healthgevity has to offer and what longevity is going to mean in the future.
It's such a positive thing that people, on average, but again, in our own lives, are most likely going to live so much longer, and yet it causes its own problems. That this eternal wish of humanity to have forever life, or at least a very long life, as such a positive thing, even that brings up all these challenges, and let alone social security and public policy and all the rest, but on the quality of life part,
pension and so forth,
and everything. But you're looking at the quality of it.
I'm looking at the quality of it, and also just seeing from because the question is the problem today is that most people die from an age-related disease, not from age itself. It's not aging that's a problem. It's the age-related diseases that stem from it. So how are we going to change all of that? This is the most, András, we are living in the most fantastic period of history, I think. We are living this change. But the most difficult part is that we need to change, and we don't like change. Intrinsically, we are prehistoric beings that living in a very modern world and are struggling because everything is being questioned. What was good for us before is not good anymore for us. And so we are in this period where everything is changing, and the systems are updating themselves. The pensions, we have to work longer, but we live longer. All of that is, we have to do that, and we are not ready for it yet. And this is also the message that I'm trying to share in as many possible challenges or channels now, soon music as well, is to say, from how do we do that? Please, it's about us controlling ourselves, our adaptation, and the way we see the world, our perspectives. Yes, we need to do it. But what's the bonus of all of this? Don't you want to feel content, fulfilled, and healthy? Don't you want to have a good life, evolve as a person, be more resilient? It's not coming to you. It's something you create. And this is where we need to somewhere realize that we have outsourced it, and now we have to insource it.
Take responsibility.
And I'm the proof, I've done it for 25 years now, that you can.
With those words, Thank you so much, Tom.
You're welcome.
Those who want to get in touch with you, are you on social media or
Yeah, on LinkedIn.
your website, your
Yeah.
LinkedIn? Yeah. There I also see you, you see me, and we keep
When
the
they find
connections.
you, they find me.
Exactly. Very good. Well, thank you so much. Hope to be continued
Thank you
one day.
for the interview. Thank you.